Okay, last year I made a movie called The Antarctica Challenge, A Global Warning. And basically it was a documentary focusing on the new scientific discoveries being made related to climate change in Antarctica. And this happened during International Polar Year. And that's why I made the film. And I want to share with you tonight some of the discoveries that were made. Okay? Our story begins right here in Homer, Alaska. It was 15 years ago today that I brought my kids to Homer, Alaska. Yeah. And I brought them here because I was doing a location scout for another film I was working on called Earth's Natural Wonders. And one of those wonders was the Kenai Fjords. So when I came up here, it was the first time for me being in a polar region, and I saw the icebergs and the glaciers calving and all those wonderful things, and I was completely sold on it. So I wanted to pursue the rest of my documentary filmmaking career focusing on the polar regions. So when I heard that International Polar Year was taking place in 2007, I thought it was an excellent opportunity to do a film on that. So when I looked at the Arctic, I saw there was all kinds of coverage coming out of the Arctic because that's reasonably accessible. But I also saw there was absolutely nothing coming out of Antarctica, so I decided that's where I was going to go. So one of the first things we discovered when we went down there was the penguin situation. There's diminishing populations affecting the 3 species of penguins that are resident down there. Basically, these are the Gen 2, which you see before you, and the Adelie penguins and the chinstrap penguins. Chinstrap penguins look like the Gen 2s, but they have a nice little strap under their chin. Now, these particular penguins, the Gen 2 and the Adelies, their populations have dropped by 50%. Oh. Yeah. And the Gen 2s, or the chinstraps, have dropped by 65%. Now, the reason they've dropped is directly related to climate change. And the reason they've dropped is because their food supply has diminished. And that is this little creature called the krill. Now, the krill is a small shrimp-like marine crustacean that lives in Antarctica, and all animals in Antarctica eat krill. Now, because the temperatures have become warmer in the waters down there, they've been unable to reproduce. Unlike humans who like warmer temperatures to reproduce, the krill actually needs colder temperatures. So with less krill, there's less food for the penguins, and their numbers have been declining. So that was one of the first things we discovered. However, there's also some good news down there too. With the warming temperatures comes the melting of the snow and the ice. And when that snow and the ice has disappeared from some of the islands and shorelines here, it has given rise to something brand new, and this is vegetation. The botanist that we brought down there was examining this vegetation, and they were unable to identify it to anything familiar today. So the conclusion being drawn is this is prehistoric vegetation. Yeah, and it was believed to be buried in the rock over thousands of years, and now that the sun has hit the rock, these dormant spores and seeds have established themselves for the very first time. So, and the other interesting thing about this new vegetation is it provides food and shelter for insect life, something else that wasn't existing down there except in one species of wingless fly. So now that there's more insects, there's also more birds because the birds are coming to eat the insects. And with the birds comes other animals that eat birds. And so we're seeing a real genesis in Antarctica. It's no longer just a continent of snow and ice. One of the other problems here was suicidal penguins. Now, this picture is a joke. I just put that in for a laugh. This is not the way that penguins usually kill themselves. However, in the past 5 years, ever since the warming temperatures in Antarctica have gone above 0 Celsius for the very first time, there's been a very strange phenomenon taking place. Penguins, as you know, if anybody's seen March of the Penguins, they're very communal. They like to hang around each other, and they're great family people. But now what they're doing is wandering off on their own, sole penguins, lone penguins, walking deep into the continent and never coming back. Yeah. Now, the scientists that have been studying this thought that maybe they're marching out to find a new home for their tribe, someplace where there's more food. But the reality is, if they were to do that, they would walk along the shoreline because they eat krill. They wouldn't walk deep into the continent away from their food supply. So penguins have followed this strange phenomenon, and what they found is the penguins just keep walking, and they never stop walking until they drop dead. They don't rest, they don't take a nap, they just keep walking until they can't walk anymore. And some of the scientists have actually picked them up and brought them back, thinking that reacquainting them with their tribe would, solve the problem. The minute they put them down, they turn around and go right back where they were. So it's a very unusual problem, and every year, the numbers of these suicidal penguins have been increasing. So.
Oh my God.
Something else new in Antarctica is new kinds of predators. What we're looking at here are a couple of humpback whales. Now, because the water is becoming warmer, these whales are now entering the warmer waters of the Antarctic Ocean. And what they're eating, of course, is? Very good. Thank you very much. And what makes this particularly a problem for the ecosystem in Antarctica is one whale with one gulp of krill can consume as much krill as would otherwise feed 2,000 penguins. So it's not just that the krill population is diminishing because of the warm waters. Now these whales are coming in, eating the krill and leaving nothing for the penguins. Kind of like the fat guy at the buffet, eh? You don't want to be behind him. So. Another predator we have here is this fierce-looking bird called a skua. Now, if you see it on the shoreline, it's almost impossible to see because its feathers really look like the rocks of the beach that it walks around. Now, these guys used to only eat the eggs of penguins because it was frozen terrain. They couldn't nest there. It was really hard. They would just kind of fly in, poke at the eggs, eat the yolk, and then fly back home. But now, because there's soil and rock, they can actually form nests. And what's happened, especially with the diminishing populations of penguins, there's less eggs for them to eat. So what have they done? They're now starting to eat baby chicks. And again, this is just a natural phenomenon that happens when the environment has to evolve, and this is a new predator in Antarctica that way too. Okay, now this is something very interesting. I'm going to try to give you a demonstration. This is a Pine Island Glacier. The melting ice in Antarctica, of course, is the biggest problem. We've heard a lot about that. And to differentiate it from what's happening in the Arctic, I have this little cup of water. I hope this works. Okay, this cup of water represents the Arctic Ocean, and the ice floating on top is the polar ice cap. Okay, so when that ice melts, as it is doing, it's not going to overflow the glass, right? Because the displacement's already been made. However, when you add, I wish I had this, when you add the ice from Antarctica, the land ice, to it, of course it overflows. And this is what's happening in Antarctica right now. Just to show the people in the back, see, it's overflowing. Look, flooding. So Antarctica holds 70% of the world's fresh water in its ice. Yeah, I know, that's quite a bit. Now what's happening here, this is one particular glacier that we profiled in the film. And when the ice is melting there, it's contributing as much as 46 gigatons of fresh water into the Antarctic Ocean. And that in turn is causing the world's sea levels to rise. If this glacier alone were to melt completely, it would add 1.5 meters or 4.5 feet to the world's sea levels. Okay? And right now, it's on a scale of doing that. I'll show you the way it looks today. This is just a few years after. You see all this exposed rock and a lot less of the ice. Now what's happening to compound the melting problem is with the exposed rock, you're getting the sun hitting it, and that's causing an endothermic reaction where the rock heats beneath the ice. So now it's like having a big chunk of ice on the burner of your stove. Okay, it's melting from underneath as well as from the heat on top. Now the other thing that's happening is when the fresh water enters the salt water, it's desalinizing the ocean. And fresh water, as we know, evaporates faster than salt water, and that causes more precipitation. So now you're getting more rain in Antarctica, and what does that do? That helps melt the ice too. Yeah. So we're really concerned about this particular problem. However, there's some good news. The ozone hole. I don't know how much you know about the ozone hole, but at one point it was as big as the continent of North America. and it completely encompassed all of Antarctica. And then we saw this as a very severe problem, and so the United Nations called for all the countries of the world to get together to try to solve this problem. And what they did was they came up with something called the Montreal Protocol, where everybody got together, and all the nations of the world agreed to stop using CFCs or chlorofluorocarbons. And all the nations of the world agreed to this, except for 3. That was Timor East, Andorra, and San Marino. Every other country agreed, except those 3. And it was predicted at the time by the scientists that it would take about 50 years before we noticed a difference. Well, I'm very happy to report that after only 25 years, the hole had not only stopped growing, it's actually starting to shrink. So that was very exciting because we were there for that, and we saw the first measurements where the hole is starting to go the other way. It's no longer elliptical, it's actually circular. And remember I said it covered the entire continent of Antarctica? Here's what it looks like today. See, it's actually getting smaller. And you see some of the continent here. Yeah. So that was very encouraging. Now, after our trip to Antarctica, and International Polar Year was finished, there was a conference where all the scientists got together to report on their findings. This was the International Polar Year Science Conference in Oslo, Norway. I attended this, and what you're seeing there is a tent of the Sami people. These are Nordic people that live in the Arctic Circle in Norway, and they're having a particularly bad problem, so they wanted the world to pay attention to it, so they set up some tents right outside the conference center. Now, their particular problem is very similar to the penguins. Their food supply is disappearing. They hunt and eat reindeer. And the reason the reindeer are disappearing is because the reindeer eat grass. And because there's no longer any grass for them to eat, they've left the area. And the reason there's no grass to eat is because there's a bug that eats grass that usually disappears after 3 months. But because of the warming temperatures, the bugs are hanging around. They're eating all the grass, and there's no grass left for the reindeer, so the reindeer are taken off, and the poor Sami people don't have anything to eat. So that's their particular problem. So, that brings us to this fine young man. Jan Egeland, United Nations Under-Secretary General for Humanitarian Affairs, also runs an organization known as the Arctic Council. That's a group of nations that work together to solve the problems of the Arctic. And one of the things he announced was that there's a brand new program to help the Sami people either relocate to a new area where they have reindeer, or to show them where they can go should they want to relocate on their own. And once again, this is something that's helping the people that live in the Arctic region that would otherwise have no other place to go. Now, what I like about both these situations is we have proven that no matter how insurmountable the environmental crisis may seem to be, we have proven on these 2 occasions when the world comes together, we can solve any challenge, even the Antarctica challenge. Thank you.